Publishing. Wade Franson is the host of Created in the Image of God, a series that examines the role of religion in society, from messianic returns to the emotive responses transmitted through our culture. Wade fearlessly addresses reality claims from all directions, objectively exploring their compatibility with Holy Scripture. Tonight's episode, Crisis of Faith in Times of Crisis, with Philip Strouse.
Good evening, everyone. This is your host, Wade Franson. This is Tuesday night, Created in the Image of God at 8 p.m. I come to you from southern Wisconsin, where it is hot and muggy. In case I have a little bit of penne pasta with pesto sauce in my teeth, it's because I was out watching my son play baseball and rushed home to get ready for this exciting show tonight. Our guest is further south, whereas we have hot and muggy because of a lot of rain. He's facing drought in his region. And that's something that matters because of the role that he has with the Federal Emergency Management area. So we've had him on the show before. His name is Philip Strouse, and he has a remarkable book about Joseph. Tonight we'll be talking about, what was that title again that we just saw? Crisis of Faith in Times of Crisis. I'd like to welcome Philip Strouse back to the studio.
Good evening, Wade.
Well, Philip, we were just talking right before the show as we were doing the tech check about the state of the world. We've talked a little bit about the weather. Your approach in your book and in your work, frankly, is to be a hero, if I dare say, behind the scenes, not a prominent looking to in any way be visible, but to do great work behind the scenes. And your book, Joseph, talks about a number of figures throughout human history and recent American history by the name of Joseph. Is that correct?
Right, that's right. So background on what I do in emergency management and looking at if it's at the federal level or state or local level in emergency operations center, you have a unique experience there where you see different agencies and different people from all backgrounds come into this operations center when it's needed most. And people are never going to know their name. They're never going to be in front of the camera. But they come to their desk, they come to their workstation, they drop everything, and this is not their regular 9-to-5 job. But they come to sit to staff a certain desk or emergency support function, if it's logistics, communications, operations, planning, and they are working across different agencies, different government levels, and working together. They could have had an argument out in the parking lot, but when they come in, everybody works together for a common goal of helping people that are in very serious situations, if it's flooding, if it's a hurricane, if it's tornado. And I think that's the most aspirational and inspirational part of emergency management. So we're gearing up for you're right, down in Atlanta or the Atlanta metro area and throughout Georgia, we have a high sitting over us. And so it's just 100 degrees and dry, which is a little unusual. Usually we're 80% humidity, but so we're just getting ready for what's forecasted to be a big hurricane season and getting people ready in advance so they're not scrambling when we need them to be in a safe place.
Well, in these days, public servants often get a bad rep because of the, dare I say, political turmoil that we're going through in this nation. And, I've heard, we don't get involved in politics on this show at all, but if ever it comes up, some of the people that I know and love will sometimes say a pox on both houses, right? Because they feel like both sides of the current, argumentative contending divide within our country are wrong by virtue of being so argumentative and so contending and so unable to reach agreement and do good for the country. And I think there's some truth to that. A lot of things have come to light in the last few decades. Things that formerly were declared to be conspiracy theories have proven in some ways and in some cases to be true. And yet you're working in an area of government where there probably are a lot of people who really do fit the description of public servant. civil servant. Is that accurate?
That is, and as far as what I've seen, for the most part, there are a lot of people in government still today, just like it doesn't matter, again, if you're in local government, like a city or county government, to the state level, even federal, where people do this because they love helping other people, and that's what really drives them. You're not gonna get rich working as a county emergency manager, but, well, rich in the money sense, but you're rich in other ways, and I think that's what really the involvement and feeling. I think it's that purpose-driven aspect, again, of helping other people, and that's so. With that background of public service and emergency management, when I, again, looking at the book, stumbled across this Joseph that I uncovered in the book of Acts and in the New Testament of the Bible, and then finding these other Josephs throughout history. And again, it goes to the fact of working behind the scenes. You're not posturing. You're not doing this to put yourself out in front. And it really goes along with the emergency management aspect of, you're doing this for the benefit of others. You're not doing this really for the benefit of yourself. But when you do that, benefit comes back to you in a better society, in a more fulfilled life. And I think that's what part of really resonated with the book as I wrote it. And it took 7 years to write it. And it was not writing a book. It was more of walking a journey. And
we're gonna take a look at a trailer of that book in a minute and make sure that our audience knows they can have an opportunity to get a copy of that by contributing in the chat. But one of the most famous Josephs of the Bible is Joseph, who was sold into slavery and ended up in Egypt, right? And wasn't he instrumental in assisting with a large national emergency in the nation of Egypt?
Yes, he was involved in really a 14-year emergency, and you have different phases.
Let's unpack that quickly for the audience who may or may not know what we're talking about.
Yeah, so Joseph was one of the 12 sons of Jacob, one of the patriarchs, who was, of course, the son of Isaac, who was the son of Abraham, and he, of course, Joseph was one of Jacob's favored sons. It was this, because he was Rachel's firstborn and was given the coat of many colors. The brothers had jealousy, sold him to the Ishmaelites, who took him down to Egypt, and it was a testing process for Joseph. A young man had to grow up and go through things that were not his fault, and so realizing life isn't fair, but God is just, and was prepared. He was in a pit. He was in Potiphar's house. He was then in a prison, but it prepared him to be in Pharaoh's, courtroom, or in his throne room. So, and then through that, the emergency you're talking about, referring to, is because Pharaoh had a dream that Joseph interpreted of the fat and the lean cows, and then the same with the corn stalks, and looking at what devoured what. So he knew he had 7 good years to prepare the people in the land of Egypt for 7 bad years. And so it is very much in emergency management. You have preparedness, you have response, you have recovery, mitigation, back to preparedness. And so it's a cycle. And he was able to save the ancient empire of Egypt. And that's how, in doing that, he saved his brothers. Again, going back to, it comes back home, where he got to see his father again, and 70 of Jacob and the other the brothers and their wives and children came down to the land of Goshen, and
ultimately he brought Jacob to Egypt, or his I'm trying to remember if Jacob actually made it there, or if they just brought him.
Yeah, Jacob was there as Joseph introduced Pharaoh,
right,
to his father.
That's right. Yeah. So a shout out to our Baha'i friends. We air this also on the Baha'i channel in Clearwater. The founder of the Baha'i faith, Baha'u'llah, was exiled by the Ottoman Empire to the city of Akka, which at that time was part of the Ottoman Empire. This is before it was even called Palestine. And later it was taken over by the British, and later then it became the state of Israel, Akka being in the state of Israel today. But his son, Abdul Baha, then lived there in Akka, and there was a similar famine crisis, and Abdul Baha worked with the government authorities and the local people to put together a food storage plan, and he was actually knighted by the British Empire for his work. And I just learned in the last couple of weeks, this is why it's on my mind, that I guess the British armies were coming through and they were out of food. And because he had taken these precautions, they were able to gain nourishment from the food that had been stored up in Akka. And had he not done that, and that's why he was knighted by the British Empire. But you have these hidden figures, and I don't even know if Baha'is necessarily know that story. But you have these almost hidden figures who are working behind the scenes, and that's what he did. That's what Joseph did. And you identified a number of personalities with the name Joseph. Who are some of the other Josephs in your book?
Well, it goes to Joseph, the guardian, if you will, of Jesus, Joseph and Mary. And what I found very intriguing in looking at that, right around surrounding Jesus' life, is you had this man named Joseph that was the overseer, the father, if you will, of the natural, or the man in the flesh that would teach Jesus to walk, teach Jesus how to be a carpenter, and was so very prominent figure in Jesus' early years. And then at Jesus' death, you have a Joseph of Arimathea. So you have bookend Josephs, and just the uniqueness of that. You have other Japheth, really, with Noah as a form of antediluvian Joseph, and what that means in ancient.
Wasn't Japheth the one that taught Moses how to set up an administrative structure? Is that right? The captains of tens and hundreds.
Oh, I don't know. That's a good question. I'd have to look at that. And
it was his father-in-law that was like the prince of meat of. Anyway, go ahead. I'm going to look it up during the commercial break.
Okay, all right. But so looking at, and so what I did in all the research, and that's why it took 7 years, is going back to uncovering, and then I'd start writing something, and another Joseph would pop up, and so you chronologically to try to determine how that all fits in. But then you have, of course, Josephus. I don't know if I'm still live here. I got a connection lost, but I'm going to keep.
You are live. Yep, we hear you.
Okay. It must be buffering a little bit, but so Josephus, that's Joseph or Yosef, and he is probably the most prominent outside of the Bible, the historian that captured a lot of what took place around the time of the Roman Empire, and then going back to the antiquities of the Jews, and then the Jewish wars, and then there's a mirror example of him in the time of Joseph Warren, when you have this Joseph Plum Martin, who was the Josephus of the 1770 war. So he was like the foot soldier, because you had John Adams and you had the other writers of what we know today, George Washington, etc. But you didn't have anybody at the foot soldier enlisted level to give an account of the war. And this Joseph Plum Martin had a diary, so with all the writings, and so he was like the Josephus with the same name, but in the 1775 through 1783 battles. So all those different things happening, and then the other big Joseph that really, as you and I have talked offline about, what started it was the Joseph in the book of Acts, and where they were looking to who was going to replace Judas as part of the 12, the tight group of 12, and then you had the 70 disciples and the 120. And Joseph was mentioned, but he wasn't picked. And why would you mention somebody that wasn't picked? Usually you would just pick the winner, right? Name the winner and keep the other person from embarrassment, especially for millions of people that are going to read about this. But he was named for a certain reason, and I put that in one of the final chapters of the book, and that's really what piqued my interest. And then I found out about Joseph Warren, and the key thing with Joseph, the name, is for some reason people tend to forget. People forgot about Joseph back in Egypt. Pharaoh forgot him. He was first forgotten by Pharaoh's butler, right? You had the baker and the
Yes.
butler,
Yeah, that's true.
and he was forgotten. And then Pharaoh, the later Pharaoh, forgot him. And then looking at Joseph Warren, we American people, in knowing all the patriarchs' names and the founders' names, and nobody knows Joseph, or most people don't know Joseph Warren. So that's why I felt I needed to write the book so we would understand who he was for the founding of the nation.
So one more quick question before we go to that video of the book. We spent some time talking about your background on your first appearance in the show, which was many months ago. So just one question on that. What was it? What do you attribute in your background, your earliest memories? Where did this come from? Your interest in these behind the scenes movers and shakers, behind the scenes, not heroes, that unsung heroes. Where does that interest come from in your background?
I think as a young boy, I can remember you always look for the outcast, who is not picked on the team, or who is shunned, who is bullied, and seek them out as a friend, And I don't know, my heart's drawn to somebody who's off on the side of the school all alone, and they have just as much worth as the star quarterback, right?
Too few people do that. It's amazing that you said you always, well, maybe you always do that, but there are a lot of people who kind of do the opposite.
Yeah, I think it's I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse, but I try to be very considerate, and sometimes that's a pet peeve when you see people who are inconsiderate. And
well, amen. So, when I was watching my son play baseball, I mentioned right before and rushing here, my son's name is Caleb, who, by the way, I picked because he was the lesser of the good spies, right?
Yeah.
Joshua and Caleb were the two spies among the 12 that brought back a good report. And Joshua was the prominent one. Joshua was the one that was picked to lead Israel after Moses. And I thought a lot about this when I named my son Caleb, because of the same thing, sort of a little bit more in the background. A solid, good guy stood up for God, but you don't read about Caleb after Joshua comes in the picture. There are a couple of little things, but anyway. So my son's name is Caleb, and one of the pitchers on the other team they were playing was also named Caleb. But that Caleb had an arm that was not fully formed. And so that Caleb was throwing pitches with his right hand, and then immediately, he putting the glove back on his right hand to play the field, and then he would put the glove under his arm and pitch and quickly be back in play. And he was doing very well. And I was like, this is awesome that he has a place on the team, and it's perfect. He's the pitcher, and he manages to do that with one arm. But then when they came in to bat, lo and behold, he's up batting, and he had the ability to hold the bat and use one arm and steady it with his other, and he hit, and he got a base hit, and now he was running, but one of his legs was also not perfectly developed, so his run was not. But he got on base. I think he stole a base, and eventually he ran home and scored for the team.
Mm-hmm.
And as you're sort of rooting for one team, when he was up to bat, I was rooting for the other team. Mm-hmm. I really wanted to see the other Caleb, not my Caleb, get on base.
Yeah.
So I have that same affinity, but I've seen many times people who have, for some reason, they're insensitive in that way, and they're not, really looking out for those who are disadvantaged in some way.
I think, Wade, what it is you try to put yourself in that person's shoes, and okay, that's me. How would I want to be treated? And then you empathize. And then
and I know as a kid, I wouldn't even have been there. I feel like I wouldn't have even had the courage You know what I mean? So I'm also applauding his courage and his example that he's setting for anyone else, because he's guaranteed he's working harder than anyone else.
Yeah, and inspiring adults, not just the other kids, but adults, right? Yeah, that's very
Yep.
true.
Okay. Well, having said all that, thank you so much for this opening segment. Let's go now to that video of your book, and let's remind the audience that um, engage in the chat as some of you are doing, and we'll be picking one of you to get a copy of Philip's book. What is the title of it exactly? Just Joseph?
It's Joseph serve behind the scenes to set the stage.
Perfect. Here we go.
Of time, where the footprints of history are etched by almost invisible figures, one name echoes through the ages. Dr. Joseph Warren. Philip Strouse invites you on a journey through the trails of time, exploring the critical role this physician played in Boston and beyond. From antiquity to the birth of the United States, these often overlooked agents propelled generations into unimaginable realms. This biography not only highlights several Josephs but focuses on Warren, perhaps the most enigmatic of them all. What he did, and what he didn't do, continues to resonate globally. Join the author as he reveals how Warren chose to serve others, creating a legacy that transcends time. Discover the enigma, explore the past. Joseph, Serve Behind the Scenes to Set the Stage, by Philip Strouse. Available at Amazon.
And there's a QR code if anyone has a second device. We don't want you to lose contact with the show and go there, but that's a QR code that will take you direct to Amazon, I believe, where you can buy a copy of that. Or, engage in the chat, and maybe you'll be the lucky recipient of a free copy at the end of the show. Welcome back. This is Creating in the Image of God. I'm your host, Wade Franson. Excuse me, I'm here with Philip Strouse, talking about crisis of faith in times of crisis. So your book is largely history. Let's talk for a moment about the value of history. Many of us may recall from our school days maybe not liking history so much. It often depends on whether or not you had a good history teacher who made that subject interesting, or whether it was just a difficult subject where you had to memorize a lot of dates and didn't really have the context. But share for us a moment why you decided to spend 7 years documenting a historical record. Okay, we've talked about the point of the man, but what about history generally? Investing 7 years of your life to document history.
Sure, that's a good question. I've always been interested in history. I think putting in the context of navigation, maybe it's your compass and your map. And when you're hiking, or when you're trying to triangulate where you are on a plane, or on the Earth's surface, you don't know really where you are. You might have an idea based on a few landmarks, but unless you really have some retrospect and knowing the situation, you're kind of floating, and you're just gonna. And most people, history repeats itself, right? Unless you learn lessons of it. I think you can walk in circles without a compass and just thinking you're going straight. But I hate to, if I learn a lesson, I don't want to repeat that mistake, right? So, and if I can do things smarter based on what's happened in history, and to see where things have went right and wrong, and then especially studying, let's say, the Old Testament, the New Testament, you look at what pleased God, what was good, what was not good, and you don't find that just in human nature, but you have to find it in some more absolute. And I think history, when you look at it, as long as you're looking at all the history, and I think that's where Joseph Warren, he was not popping up, and I spent a lot of time looking. I didn't know anything about him, so I couldn't write about him unless I did research in a lot of those biographies. But I think it's intriguing, Wade, when you can find your part in history right now, by looking at what has taken place. You can be inspired by things that have been done with Aristotle and Plato and the history of the Greeks, the Athenians, and it just gives you that much richer an existence. And I think that's really what drives me. I was never, I mean, I can appreciate math, I appreciate science, but I was more into the fuzzies. I was more into the history, the writing aspects. And so it was a 7 years, but it didn't seem, it was like Jacob and Rachel. It was not a very long 7 years because I was in love with the topic, right? And
Well,
so
I love all your biblical references, and clearly you know that biblical record. So I want to emphasize one of the foundational approaches that I take on this show is, as it says in the intro, to look at everything in the light of the Word of God. And again, a shout out to my Baha'i friends. I am a Baha'i, and that same person, Abdul Baha, wrote that it is the religious duty of every Baha'i to know the Old and the New Testament. And he wrote elsewhere that you must know the Old and to know and understand it. And he wrote elsewhere that you must know both of these as the Word of God. So that's for me foundational. And of course, the spiritual principles, the spiritual teachings are the most important. But too often I hear people dismiss the history in the Bible as myth. And I know because I went to the city of David mission many years ago in Israel, in conjunction with Hebrew University when I was my undergrad degree, and I was studying theology and I studied biblical archaeology. And I know at that time, BAR, the Biblical Archaeology Review, was one of the magazines that we had to read to be up to speed on the latest developments in biblical archaeology, because the City of David Archaeological Expedition was one of the most prestigious biblical archaeology projects in the history of the world. And so I was shocked by how in Biblical Archaeology Review, the archaeologist who made a case against the Bible would be the celebrated archaeologist. He was the one who would make a name for himself. When he showed how the Bible was wrong based on archaeology, he was celebrated. When 5, 10, 15 years later, as would inevitably happen, in my opinion, the Bible was proven right. Nobody cared. Nobody looked at it. He had made his reputation. He wasn't discredited. And whoever did the research that proved the Bible right was not a celebrated archaeologist. You follow me? And this was always kind of shocking to me. And so I love that you emphasize understanding the Bible from a macro history perspective, because the Bible gives us God's view on human events, and the conclusions that we derive from the spiritual teachings of the holy writings is often different from that which is current among men in terms of the current state of science, right? Science is a practice. It's not a destination.
Right.
Science is based on research and discovery, and yes, conclusions along the way, which are often overturned. We no longer use leeches for bloodletting. We're learning a lot of things about what is and what is not a vaccine these days. And again, in terms of things that are discovered and then swept under the carpet because they contradict accepted teachings, that have been accepted by experts. Taking a step back and looking at things through the lens of revealed holy writings, which I believe they are revealed, gives one a very important perspective on life, in my opinion. And so knowing that history and the stories, and whether or not even some of them are factually true in every detail, or whether they're summarized for their moral lesson, is not even the point.
No, well,
but I find more and more the deeper you dig, they are in fact factual in every detail as well. And I could give example after example, which I won't do here because I'm talking too much and this is your show. So I'll let you respond to all that.
That's good, but I think right. Even technology and science, the more advanced we get, the more we see that the Bible doesn't have to defend itself. It just exists, and what it stated thousands of years ago, we're finding out. Oh, that really right. It comes back to prove itself, and it doesn't have to. It just does. The telescopes and the web, and all the different things that are out there finding new things. We realize the more we learn, the more we realize there's a lot we don't know. Um, and so, right, it's observation, it's discovery, it's finding things out. But when you let the Bible sit there and percolate with the new findings, it has never been proven false.
So if Joseph Warren were here today and he were a strategic advisor to leaders in the nation the way he was when he was there, what are some of the things based on your research he might be telling us today? And do you cover some of that in your book, the implications for today?
Yeah, he wasn't too much of a talker. He was more of a, and maybe that's what we need. He was more of a doer. Um, because so you had John Hancock, who was the president of the provincial Congress for Massachusetts. Of course, you didn't have a federal government, you didn't have a central government besides British rule, the crown, and British governors. But as they were getting away from that, you had provisional congresses, if you will, that were set up for the colonies. So Massachusetts had one, and then so a big deal was getting a continental congress, and that's why they were trying to get delegates from across the 13 colonies. But I say all that to say that John Hancock was the provisional president of the Massachusetts colony, which Massachusetts was, in Boston, was the epicenter of everything going on in those colonial times. And so now John Hancock was also a delegate to Philadelphia with Samuel Adams and John Adams. And so Joseph Warren was the president pro tem of the provincial Congress. He stayed back to keep things going in Boston and in the surrounding areas in Cambridge and Lexington and Concord and Salem, etc. And so I guess the one thing he would be talking about is they were not opposed to the king per se. They were trying to stay loyal to the king, but they were against Parliament and its mandates and its taxation and these heavy regulations. But they were trying to work things out, and he knew pretty much everybody as a doctor. That was first and foremost what his specialty was, and he served everybody. So the greatest in Boston, the lowest in Boston. He knew Governor Hutchinson, and so knowing these people, he would be the one to relay the message and try to reason with the governor that this is really capricious. It's against the people of Boston, and trying to explain and show reason to the governor, who was trying to follow the king's mandates, but with a very heavy hand. And Joseph saying there's a way to do this to rule, and we're all loyal British subjects until the point got where they just could not deal with the tyranny that was coming into the colonies. So he was one that was trying to make peace. He was always trying to be humble, and that's where if he hadn't have been humble, that's the one thing about that I put in the book about him and George Washington. They were different. They could have been kings. They could have taken over and made a new kingdom in North America, but they walked away from the presidency. They walked away from high position and fame because they had servant leader hearts. And so Joseph Warren was one. I think he would, in his conversations, he was one that would be able to speak with confidence. When he spoke, people would listen, but he didn't speak to hear himself speak. And sometimes the men of that day, that's what they were all about. And that's why they get very little done in the Congress sometimes, because they all had a good point, but they would speak but not listen. And he was the other way around. I think he would want presidents and governors and kings to listen more and have the wisdom of Solomon, then speak and rule with a heavy fist.
Thank you for sharing that perspective. And speaking of humility, I was wrong about Japheth. I sent this in the chat a little while ago. Jethro was the father-in-law of Moses.
Yes.
That I was talking about. So, yes, your show host makes mistakes, but I do try. Also, I wanted to highlight another Joseph. We're going to go to a commercial break now, and somebody we've had on the show a couple of times, Joseph Atman, is one of our sponsors. And we're just going to do a little plug for him and the work that he's doing in a variety of states in the field of education. And when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about what your thoughts are on education of our young people and the role of history and the writing of your book. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of Philip Strouse after this commercial break.
Middle Tree got started by a group of educators who wanted to see education done in a different way.
Socioeconomic status is the primary factor in whether a person is admitted to college at present. And we think that that is simply, well, unfair. And so our mission is to work against that by allowing people from less privileged backgrounds access to the tools that people from more privileged backgrounds are able to have.
The programs that we offer here are tutoring, college counseling, ACT and SAT test prep, and our summer seed program. The tutoring program is unlike any other on the planet that I'm aware of, in that we allow students to be here on a membership basis. Students can come as often as they'd like to without an appointment, and they can be here for as long as they want to.
I really like helping kids understand things that they have been told that they're not good at.
In 6th grade, that's when I noticed my grades started to go up, especially in math. That's usually where I need my help.
I prefer to be able to just have fun with the kids in a way that inspires them to want to learn more and to have fun while they're learning.
The way they do it here, they just have that vibe, if they make it fun.
We don't have a system here, we don't have a workbook, we don't have an actual program. We have individual students, and we approach each and every individual student as individuals.
I love to go finish my homework so I can go home, chill, and just play video games or something like that.
What Middle Tree did for me was it gave me back my time after dinner or before dinner to do things with my son that let me be mom. It gave me back my mom time.
I came here and I finished the year with a B in math, which came up from an F, which I totally think is because of this place. I had A's and B's completely.
We really want to make sure that we're reaching people on their levels.
If you don't understand something, they will help you until you feel comfortable with it.
I like to empower my students to use their voices.
They want you to ask questions, and they want you to learn better than you ever did before.
Really, all we really want are for our kids to be healthy and happy. And I think Middle Tree embraces each kid being their best self, being their individualized self.
And there's a QR code that you can look at to learn more about it. They are in California, they are in Arizona. They have state contracts to support people in the public educational system, and I think several other states, and they're growing and expanding. So shout out to Joseph Atman, who's a fan of the show, who's been on the show, whom we'll probably have back again, and the work that he's doing. Another Joseph that I thought we would spotlight tonight.
Very good.
So, so what are your thoughts on education, Philip, and the contribution that your book and history and these stories is making, and how is that, shaping? What can you say about that?
Yeah, I think solid education is key to a moral people, right? And you really can't have self-government if you're not morally grounded and have a sense of learning and truth. And I went to a small Christian school that my mother and father didn't have a lot of money, but that was their priority, is to make sure we were grounded and learned math, science, English, foreign language, electives, sports, um, and we did without on other things because they saw that as the most important thing. And from there, I just had an innate drive to learn more because you can appreciate that when that's instilled in you. And I think even across college campuses today, that either some students are not learning, or they desire not to. They think they have enough knowledge that they don't. They're the experts already. And in my 50 years of being on this earth, I know that I can see it in the chat that the more I know, the more I learn, the more I realize there's more to. It's like a sponge. There's more to soak in as you grow. But again, looking at history, sometimes the history books are altered, or a lot in today's curriculum is could be lacking, I guess, and it depends on what we're putting in front of our students from kindergarten through 12th grade into your associates, bachelor's, master's degrees, and what's the agenda? Are you looking at all the facts, or are you looking at certain facts to fit your narrative? And I think that can be concerning. And that's where, when I spent 7 years on this book, I didn't have anything formed in my mind of who this Joseph Warren should be. It was more of a discovery. And then I learned from that. And then my thing of the book is just sharing that and let people dig into it. For 7 years, it's a very small book because it's more of, and I think, and I've been reading through the various chat, but Dave and Carrie have a key thing. Well, that's what they put in there. History is the key. It's the key to unlocking. Some people are limited; they have walls around them, but really there are doors in people's lives, and history is the key to expound into kind of greater dimension of understanding. And I think that's the big thing. Is I have two sons. My older son's name is Caleb as well. So my thing is, I can't. Yeah, I could give. Well, I couldn't. But if I could give them $1 million, but they didn't have any learning, boy, they would just destroy themselves. But if I can give them knowledge, then $1 million will chase after them. And I think that's where the richness of, and it's not money. It's not money. It's knowing that to be resourced, and again, to have that knowledge, that learning, that understanding, so that if they are blessed and have the resources, that they know how to use that for the good of other people and are not self-centered. And I think that's where learning, again, expands. It gives you that 20/20 vision, but it also gives that peripheral vision where you're seeing that there's more of a world than just yourself.
Yeah, we've been sharing a couple of the comments. Thank you for those in the audience who are participating. This one here implying that give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day, right? M2 Bradley says, I'll take the fishing pole.
Right. Yeah, and it's the bait, right? And I think a sharp mind, you have the bait, you're able to catch a lot more fish when you're able to converse with a lot of different people, and you're able to listen. I think the active listening piece is part of education that people, it's a lost art in a lot of ways.
Well, and his history gives you perspective, right? And if you don't have perspective, you're very narrow-minded, and I like to use, you referenced Plato earlier, and Plato's cave is a famous analogy. I like to refer to living inside the onion, right? Because if you're inside the onion, there are all these layers. Mm-hmm. If you peel back the layers of an onion, in the end, there's nothing inside, but we're actually in that onion. And we have all these layers of conception and ideology and thought. We don't even know where they came from. I remember when I was a college student, and I'd lived in multiple countries. I lived in Sweden, Canada, and the United States by the time I was in college. And I spoke Swedish and English, and I was studying French. So I was broader in my perspective than many Americans. But when I took a class in psychology, and I had a very good professor, and he just began to say, here are the different schools of psychological thought as they have unfolded. And he got into some popular psychology in the United States in particular. And I came to recognize these psychological theories as layers of that onion. And I had adopted the philosophy, the ideology behind some of these psychological thinkers that had, really formed the basis of my childhood babysitter, which is, for example, TV and shows and movies and advertising. And these messages had wormed their way into my head before I was even able to consciously understand what it was I was being taught. And even things I'd learned in school. Where were these things coming from? Where were these ideas coming from? And it was that psychology class that really began to help me peel off some of these layers of the onion. And history can do that for us. If you haven't had the opportunity to really travel the world or live in different countries or learn different languages and thereby understand a different perspective, then history can help provide you with that if you dig into it.
I think, as you were saying that, Wade, I enjoy history because if I had the knowledge that I have now when I was 15 or 16 years old, wouldn't that be a wonderful life?
Well,
And
now I'm
so,
remembering a phrase from my French class. It goes, si jeunesse savait, si vieillesse pouvait, which means if youth only knew, if age only could.
so so I so the more I study history, or the more I read, and it's trying to gain the experience of others, other writers, other perspectives, and almost like you're living ahead of your life, by taking those other perspectives, because then you've like lived 200 years, right? And you have that perspective. And so that's what drives me. I don't want to live a life of regret. And being imperfect, you can often do that for the day. But oh, if I could have done that different.
Yeah, and so what many don't know about Middletree and Joseph Atman's work, he has a degree, he's a PhD in the philosophy of religion. And the middle tree in his company name is actually the tree in the midst of the Garden of Eden, the knowledge of good and evil. And this is, of course, a symbol of sin. However, Paul, the apostle, updates that metaphor by saying strong. He's talking to the Corinthian church that had all these problems, and he says, you're babes. You have need of somebody teaching you the basic principles of faith again. You're in need of milk when you should be eating meat. He says strong meat belongs to those who by reason of use have exercised their senses to discern good and evil. In other words, it was always God's intent, in a way. I don't speak for God, but it seems like God always knew Adam and Eve would eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It was really the only way. The school of hard knocks was the only way we were really ever going to learn. However, you don't have to keep making the mistakes. So I say, look, if you can't, this is a saying that I came up with years ago. If you can't be a good example, perhaps you can serve as a horrifying warning, right? So imagine if you avoid a few mistakes, what you can accomplish later in life if, with God's help and God's mercy, He enables you to avoid a few mistakes. So you go to God and ask for help, and He will give you tests and trials for you to learn the lessons. He doesn't give you a blue pill or a red pill. He doesn't hardwire, your brain and download information into you. By reason of use, He will help us use our senses to discern good and evil with His guidance, with His support. Ask and you shall find, knock and it shall be opened, right? Seek and you shall find. But you have to diligently pursue that.
Amen to that. Yeah. And it's a journey, right? And if everything was perfect and you know how the day was going to go, well, how boring would that be, right? And it's that reliance on God, not a reliance on Phil or reliance on Wade, but that mercy and that grace, that empowerment every day. And so that's, again, it goes to the Joseph aspect of looking at these ancient Josephs and seeing what they went through. We have, so Joseph, going back to Egypt, or think of Job, back when these scriptures were not existent. They had to live it. Boy, and they didn't have the book of Job in front of them.
They
Understanding
couldn't,
behind
Job couldn't refer back to Job and say, well, this is like what Job went through.
right? He didn't know what was going on in the atmosphere. And poor guy, he's losing this, losing that. And wow, so I take that and looking at these Josephs in the past going, wow, they lived it. And now I can, by their example, I can see kind of the roadmap. I know to walk here. I know these steps are solid. Over here, it might be a little shaky. So, and I think just like Enoch, it says he really walked with God when he had children. And so I have children. And so
and what God said about Abraham, I know you will teach your children.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So it's not just about Phil, and not just about those around me, but boy, I got two boys that are, if you're driving a semi tractor trailer, you take wide turns because that trailer, those wheels behind, they kind of cut corners. And so it's learning how to make sure you're really doing that turn and you're going down the right road because those wheels behind you, they're following, but you got to make, it's
and you want to learn that with something smaller than a semi trailer. You want to learn that principle with some smaller vehicle before you get on the road with the semi.
Yeah, right. So that's again, that's I think where and writing a book, I've always wanted to do it, but when I'm long gone, this book is going to still be here, and hopefully it speaks to generations behind me. My sons can take it, grandchildren, great grandchildren, and hopefully they'll put footnotes in what they've learned in each chapter from their lives, and it'll grow and go from there. But so that's kind of why I did it. Again, it's just I stumbled across it, and Joseph Warren kind of uniquely and ironically pops out of there when I wasn't even searching for him. I was searching for something back in the Book of Acts, and then this Joseph Warren comes across my trail, or I come across his.
Well, there's that QR code again. We'll leave it up there for a while for people who are watching and or following this later when we post it across all of our channels so that people know where to get the book. However, we also want to talk about the chat in the audience. Let me first just quickly answer this question. Yes, this is the Baha'i Clearwater channel. If you're watching on that, it's also the Something Other Publishing YouTube channel. We also stream this on LinkedIn. There are a lot of different channels where we're streaming this show tonight, and hope you're all enjoying listening in. So we want to go back you've been looking through some of the chat. Are there any of the chat that you feel particularly drawn to that you want to highlight and talk about, answer any questions?
Yeah, I mentioned, Dave and Carrie about history is the key. And I saw somebody about, I think it was, let me see, going back to all the chats here, figure 8. So is anyone else getting an Air Force vibe? Probably from the P-51 behind me. Of course, that would be Army Air Corps because that was pre-Air Force in World War II. But yeah, I was in the Air Force, private pilot. I didn't fly fighters or anything like that, but and that goes, I think, back to the checklist navigation. It's all about attitude. What's your attitude indicator? Keep your nose above the horizon. But so I appreciate what Figure 8 had to say. And just a lot of good chats throughout.
I like this one too that I saw. It's amazing how agendas can disguise the truth when careers are at risk. You were talking about Joseph Warren and what was going on around him at that time. It's funny how even those who are progressive can become very conservative when they're position is threatened, right? And they're now trying to hold on to what they have. And they can, you know, a lot of virtue signaling about how they're really doing this for others, but the proof is in the pudding, and what you do is more important than what you say, right? I've said so many times when it comes to religion, I really don't care what you profess. You know, it's what I believe it was James who said, you know, show me your faith without works, and I will show you my faith by my works. Or there's a Baha'i quote, let deeds, not words, be your adorning.
Or what was it? St. Francis of Assisi, preach the gospel and, if necessary, use words.
I love that. I love that. I had not heard that. Another one that I like is Jesus said, you are the light of the world, not the loudspeaker.
Right. Be seen and not heard, and it'll resonate. Yeah.
Right. The best sermon is a sterling example. That was a quote by one of my mentors when I was in college. So any particular person that you'd like to award that book to?
I'm going back to Dave and Carrie. That really caught my eye about history is the key to moving forward. Right, because again, like I said, you'll walk in circles without a good map, without a good triangulation, and understanding where we've been and where we're going and where we are in the context of history it's key. And so that phrase is perfect tonight, Dave and Carrie. History is the key to moving forward, and almost every industry does rely on it. You do a lot of analytics, you do a lot of KPIs, key performance indicators. What are we trending? You always look at charts, right? Everybody looks at history, they don't even know it. Bar graphs, you know. You look at the Dow Industrial, you're looking at what took place if you're investing. So even in the financial realm, you know, people are students of history.
Another analogy I like to use, which applies, you know, to the markets, to investing, to any aspect of life. History data can be like the froth at the edge of the ocean where the waves are crashing, and you know, the part that finally reaches you on the shore, there's froth, right? That's often what we see, but you know, when we understand the swells that are forming in the ocean, those are like the big major trends, right? And we're not getting confused by the froth at the edge of the ocean, which we tend to do in our hyper attentive data, social media, information, and distraction oriented world, right? I read a study on how over the last 15 years, the news cycles have been created in which you're constantly distracted by the latest, you know, news flash, the latest crisis, the latest shocking revelation, such that you're not ever going back and reflecting on last week's, last month's, last year's shocking revelation, which is proven to have been fake news, completely false, lies, whatever. But nobody ever reflects on it because there's a new wave of shocking distraction hitting you every 10 seconds. So there's no continuity to understand how we're being manipulated. Well, through all kinds of things, and it doesn't even have to be evil. It can just be the fact that that's what sells, and so there's money behind it, and the news media are therefore not in the business of actually informing you, but keeping you distracted so that you're tuning in and they're earning money off the advertising.
Yeah, I was going to say that studying history provides the context, and context is what we need as a society these days. So we're not to and fro, we're not tossed.
Well, we're gonna go just a little bit over time tonight, if that's okay with you, Philip. I want to air one more ad because we unfortunately don't have a video of next week's guest. We typically like to show that. I'm not sure what happened, but we'll be talking about who's going to be on next week in a minute. But we have a program here in Wisconsin at the property that we have here And the Royal Falcon Foundation is a 501c3 that sponsors programs on this property. So I'm going to do a little spot ad for the Royal Falcon Foundation. We have a program coming up end of July for young people. It's an experiential learning camp, which also has that principle of discerning good and evil through use of your senses, exercising your senses to discern good and evil. Right after this very short ad, we'll be right back with a little sneak peek, if you will, into next week's show. Don't go anywhere. Oh, actually, this wasn't loaded into the studio, so I actually have to present. Give me 1 minute. Here we go.
Welcome to the Royal Falcon Foundation. Our curriculum and activities inspire and train adolescents through hands-on experiences, fostering growth and empowerment. Through immersive and challenging experiences, we shape young minds to think independently and develop their leadership skills. Our programs foster new friendships and unity, shaping young leaders to tackle real-world challenges with confidence. We believe in equipping the next generation with the skills to become leaders of tomorrow. Join us at the Royal Falcon Foundation and be part of a journey that empowers, unites, and inspires. Visit our website and embrace a world of possibilities today. RoyalFalconFoundation.com.
There we go. So let's just show. Oh, I don't have a QR code, but you can go to the RoyalFalconFoundation.com website to learn more, watch videos about the programs, and also, if you so choose, to donate to the mission of that a nonprofit 501c3. So, Philip, thank you so much. I mean, we'll probably want to have you back again to talk more. We didn't really get into crisis of faith and how perhaps faith could help. What can you tell us in wrapping up your part of the show about the faith of Joseph Warren? Is much known about his personal beliefs and his the devotional character of his life?
No, nothing really in particular there. Of course, they would all go to the South Meeting House, or you had the Old North Church, and it was, of course, a Puritan type of environment there, but you had the deists and others. But I think the way it goes back to the way he lived and how he treated others, and his love for others showed that example of kind of what his beliefs were. But that's an interesting thing to delve into, what he might have truly believed. But I think, again, having history and having that truth, it fills the vacuum. That's where we get a crisis of faith and crisis in America, is people aren't grounded in truth and are grounded in the research of knowing what our history is and what it has been and why America has been blessed. And I think that's where a lot of true study and introspection needs to take place. And I saw Linda Lindsay's, thank you for writing the book. Well, it was my pleasure. You're certainly welcome. It's been a blessing for me to write it, just to grow from that. Every keystroke I think I've learned as I spent the 7 years doing that. But yeah, crisis of faith.
Well, and Brian is endorsing that. Yes, we should have you back.
Very good. Well, I'll send you a $20 bill whenever I get your address, Brian.
Yeah. So the fact that we don't know much about Joseph Warren's personal beliefs also speaks to his humility and the founding of this nation. There's a lot of effort to, frankly, discredit and even, in my opinion, destroy this nation, based on characterizing it as having been born in sin, and not just any sin, but an unpardonable sin, a stain that can never be washed off, and that we will have for as long as we exist. Yeah. And I just don't believe that narrative. Yes, this nation was as imperfect as any nation and as any human being. But the goals and the aspirations of this nation and its founders have shown themselves to have been worthy. based on the accomplishments, based on the transformation, based on the growth and the change that has happened. And yes, you can still point to legacy issues and concerns. But the fact is that they are legacy issues and concerns for the exact reason that we as a people have always striven to become better than we were.
Right.
And the fact that this nation was founded on freedom of religion and on certain key principles, again, we don't know, it sounds like, necessarily what Joseph Warren believed, because that was not his point or purpose to get everyone else to believe as he believed.
Mm-hmm. I'll say this: back then, he was a physician and he went to Harvard. Back when Harvard, of course, was created for the sake of putting people in the clergy. It was a lot of colleges were Christian back then, but he would dig up corpses because he was a scientist and wanting to know the decomposition. Well, that was very anti. Puritan back then. He wouldn't do that. So he was very much into the study and cutting edge type things. Right, Joseph is an enigma within the enigma, and so that's maybe book number 2.
Wonderful. Keep us posted on that, and we will definitely have you back when you write that book, or more likely before you write that book. So thank you very much for being with us, Philip. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I can tell from the audience comments that many others have enjoyed it as well. I just want to take a moment then to talk about next week's show. Next week, we will be airing a show that is From Vision to Global Movement, a sneak peek. Well, that was the sneak peek. Together with his wife, Lynn, Paul Clayton Gibbs pioneered the PAYS movement, a nonprofit organization that has grown from one pioneering team in Manchester, England in 1992 to becoming a global enterprise with teams in over 20 nations on 6 continents. PAYS equips local churches to advance the kingdom of God with new concepts, tools, and templates. And as our guests know, this show is called Created in the Image of God, the Role of Religion in Society. And what's unique about the PAYS movement is that Paul Gibbs works within public school systems, even in nations of Europe where, and I lived in Europe for 15 years in multiple different countries. Religion has, in some ways less place in some of those nations even than in America. And whereas I've said before, whereas this nation was founded on freedom of religion, many today believe that it should be freedom from religion, and religion has been pushed into the margins of society and pushed out of society. So we're going to be learning how Paul Gibbs has found a way to work in God's name and in the name of faith and religion, even within a societal context where that might otherwise be challenging. So it's going to be fascinating to have Paul on the show next week. Same time, same place, 8 p.m. Central every week. Tell your friends, share, like, subscribe, do that thing. And we'll continue to put together this great program with these great guests like Philip Strouse. So Philip, what parting words of wisdom or instruction or levity would you like to share with us, or inspiration would you like to share with the audience before we say goodbye to you for tonight?
Sure. Well, at the end of chapter 4, I talk about the cycle of democracy and the 250 years that they've noticed over the past 4,000 years of empires, that they rise and fall. And interestingly enough, we're going to be celebrating the 250th year next April of the Battle of Bunker Hill, in June, and then Lexington and Concord from April to June. So interestingly enough, we're seeing that pattern happen, and it's further explained in the book. But 250 years next April the 19th, and if you're in Massachusetts, that's going to be quite the happening place for that big anniversary.
Wonderful. Are you going to be up there for any of those events?
I sure hope so.
Wonderful. Well, if they can let you go from managing the crises down in your region, your neck of the woods. Philip, thank you for taking time from your busy schedule to be with us tonight. And may God be with you, and may God be with all of our fans, all of our viewers, and we hope to see you all back here next week.